Hi, this is a relatively new story, and there are no videos about it yet, so we thought we'd make one because it's so important. This comes from Canary, thecanary.co, and we'll put a link below. Headline: U.S. jury finds banana giant Chiquita guilty of financing paramilitary death squads in Colombia. Um, and then there's this subhead: what is it with American fruit companies? If you know the history of, I think it was called United Fruit, it was just a nonstop, front for, repression and brutality and imperialism and corporate and government criminality. So a jury has found Chiquita, which I believe is a descendant of American Fruit, if I've got even the name right. Um, And let me read this story there. In a landmark ruling, comes from another company called earthrights.org, RIGHTS. In a landmark ruling for the fight for human rights, a jury has found banana giant Chiquita Brands international libel for financing the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, AUC, a brutal paramilitary death squad. After 17 years of legal proceeding, the first set of victims have finally obtained justice. 17 years of legal proceedings. I cannot even imagine. The jury decision affirms what we have long asserted. Chiquita knowingly financed AUC, a designated terrorist organization, in pursuit of profit, despite AUC's egregious human rights abuses. By providing over $1.7 million in illegal funding to the AUC from 1997 to 2004. This is long after the coup in Guatemala, and they were involved in that as well. Chiquita contributed to untold suffering and loss in the Colombian regions of Urubá and Magdalena, including the brutal murders of innocent civilians. The historic verdict also means some of the victims and families who suffered as a direct result of Chiquita's actions will finally be compensated. This is the first time an American jury has held a U.S. corporation liable for complicity in serious human rights abuses in another country. Who were the plaintiffs? Trade unionists, workers, political organizers, social activists. Okay, this gives us a clue. Why was Chiquita, who you could start boycotting right now, by the way, why were they giving money to a death squad? Because they wanted to target trade unionists, banana workers, political organizers, and social activists. And these folks were targeted and killed by paramilitaries who were paid for by Chiquita. And let's see who the defendants are. Um, Chiquita Brands. Uh, Interesting story. What you should also know, and let me get the details on this because it's a little known fact of American history. You're surely not going to learn in school. Yeah, so a little unknown chapter in American history. And one of my theories is you can explain 90% of American history as a war against labor, a war against labor. Anyway, uh, Ford. Ford Motor Company made extensive use of gangsters, and they had as their front man a guy named Harry Bennett, and he worked in the service department. He was the head of the service department. He was also a guard, and he was the head of the detective force, Ford's detective force. How many people do you think Ford had on its detective force? 30? 100? 200? That would seem excessive, wouldn't it? Under this guy, Harry Bennett, Ford had 3,000 people working for it as informants, detectives, and so on and so forth. The job of that department was to spy on workers and, note this, maintain discipline throughout the Ford empire. The New York Times, which occasionally accidentally tells the truth, called it the largest private service, secret service force in America. All right. So we've just heard a story about Chiquita Banana, the old United Fruit or whatever it was called, um, literally paying death squads to murder labor union leaders, right? They've for the first time in history, it's now 2024. It took 17 years, but a jury has looked at the evidence and said, yeah, Chiquita, you did that. You gave money to a death squad, and that death squad ended up killing labor leaders. But we just have to look at American history. This is the 1930s. 3,000 security, secret, secret security people. Um, what else can we say about him? He liked to hire criminals. Now, everybody deserves another chance, but he liked to hire violent criminals, people who had served time for murder, for rape, for robbery. I mean, bad crimes, you know. And 20% of Ford's workforce had a uh, prison record, which means whatever they did was bad enough. Well, given how this justice system works, who knows? But a bunch of them, we can say, were bad enough that they needed to be in prison. And we're talking about not little crimes, we're talking about murder. So he liked to hire them. They were known for ruling the plant with a heavy hand. When a worker would show his ID at the gate, these former incarcerated people, some of whom were murderers, would yell, "Who's your boss? Where'd you get that badge?" Tactics designed to discourage workers from lending their credentials to union organizers. And it wasn't just enough on the job. The service department, in quotes, this was a covert operation within the so-called service department of the Ford Motor Corporation. They called it this. So this is how it always works. They have this department and it's real and they're really doing their job. And then within it, you have this other operation. And they not only were watching and intimidating employees on the job, they were also maintaining regular surveillance at bars and other recreational places throughout the Detroit area on the lookout for Ford employees who might be meeting with representatives of the United Auto Workers. Now, this guy Bennett, Harry Bennett, handpicked by Henry Ford, he also liked organized crime figures. And after the old Jewish Purple Gang had been taken over by Italians, which I'm not sure that actually happened, the principal figure was a guy named Chet Lamar, who directed rackets in the west side of town. And Bennett gave him a Ford dealership and also gave him a $100,000 a year contract to provide fruit for the cafeteria. And this apparently became a regular thing. Uh, the mob people were given more mob figures were given Ford dealerships, and the new top boss, Peter Lacavoli, recommended men for jobs with the service department. And these dealings were not confined to the Detroit area. Joe Adonis, excuse me, of Brooklyn, who was a huge mob boss, was given the contract hauling cars from Ford's Edgewater, New Jersey plant to showrooms throughout the Northeast. Now, let me give you a little inside baseball. That's the best way to move drugs, car haulers. So there's a reason the crooked guy who ran the service department of Ford made this deal with the top, one of the top organized crime people in New York City. And Adonis earned $3 million from the company for doing it. I guarantee he earned way more. Um, and anyway, it goes on and on and on and on. So this idea of big corporations working hand in hand with violent criminals to suppress labor is as American as apple pie. So that's the story today, little American history. If you want to understand American history, really, especially in the 20th century, well, 19th century too, just think of it as a war against labor. That's really 99% of the domestic things um, all end up under that category. And that includes ripping off consumers, because people are perennially poor because they're being ripped off at every turn, then they are less stable and less, able to fight back. And of course, that's a great way to weaken people covertly. You don't actually rob them, you just overcharge them for everything. But everyone thinks that's normal. So anyway, this has been Brass Check, and thank you for your support for the supporters. This is a little chapter of American history you're unlikely to get anywhere else.